At its farthest point, Long Island is approximately 120 miles from New York City. But you might have thought it was right next door, given how much New York City loomed in Republican campaigns this year. The city and Long Island are connected by a million threads of work and family and play, and the political focus on NYC goes back a long way, with Nassau Republicans long warning about the Queensification of the suburbs. Republicans to the east always have the chance to contrast themselves with the overwhelmingly Democratic city of New York. In the GOP telling, it's a city of radicals like Bill de Blasio and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the ever-present possibility of crime spiking up. But this year, Long Island GOP candidates had a few new ways to focus on NYC. One was that Democratic state legislators, many from New York City, had pushed through criminal justice reform.
We have such a dire situation that's going on right now, and it's a lack of law enforcement. And it's not because our police officers aren't doing their job. It's the reason is because we have radical New York City policies that are being passed down to Long Island. Defunding the police, bail reform, the repeal of 50A, the right to record police activity. These are all pieces of legislation that serve no purpose other than to hurt our communities.
This is state Senate candidate Alexis Wyke at a September Take Back the Senate rally in Suffolk County, talking about changes that have taken place since Albany shifted over entirely to Democratic control in 2018. That blue wave shift allowed Democrats to pass lots of state legislation, including bail reform, which ended the use of monetary bail for most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. The point was that people who couldn't afford to pay bail weren't kept behind bars to await trial, while wealthier people accused of the same crimes went free. The reforms took effect this year, were already tweaked this spring, and haven't been in place long enough to legitimately study. But the GOP has used the changes and some anecdotal examples for political effect, including plenty of colorful rhetoric.
People have said to me, well, on bail reform, they helped fix it in April, and this is what I say to them. What they did in April is akin to emptying the Titanic with a Solo cup. That's exactly what it is.
Bail reform is part of how Long Island Republicans are arguing that Democrats are anti-police and soft on public safety. That argument exploded in usage this year with nationwide protests over the death of George Floyd. Even though there were protests across Long Island too, Republicans focused on the protests and brief spurts of property damage and police officers being quote-unquote under attack in a couple cities, particularly New York.
We're not supposed to put targets on their backs. But that's exactly what Democrats did this year with their anti-cop legislation and their rhetoric. Now, as you've seen in New York City, as you've seen in Portland, as you've seen in Wisconsin, our cops are under attack.
That's Assemblyman Andrew Garbarino, who's running in New York's 2nd Congressional District, the one vacated by Pete King, a big supporter of the NYPD and NYC first responders, who also talked about the city at that Garbarino event.
Here in New York City, New York State, who are ruining our country. I mean, just look at what you see on television in Portland, Seattle.
The congressional races on Long Island have been full of NYC talk this year. Tons of de Blasio and AOC and radicalness to the west. Another way the focus on radicalness works is with the failed deal to bring an Amazon headquarters to Queens. That deal fell through in 2019 after anti-corporate opposition from Democrats, once again in New York City. It's still a GOP talking point.
Amazon. It was, quite frankly, the largest economic development project in the history of New York State. It was going to be right down the road here, creating 25,000 jobs with an average salary of $150,000 each. Real money that could have kept our kids here.
The New York City punching bag has been a Republican focus from the top to the bottom of the ticket this season. That starts with the president and goes all the way down to state assembly. This is Assembly candidate Andrew Monteleone in a Zoom endorsement interview with the Newsday editorial board.
When I was a kid, we used to go into the city to hang out, and then I moved into the city when I went to law school. And I tell you, I loved it. I can go out at 3 a.m. back then and not be so scared. I've got a sister that lives there now, and after sundown, she can't go out at night, and she lives in the Upper West Side, right across from Lincoln Center. So it's not like she's in some neighborhood that even before all this happened, you couldn't go out at night.
It's definitely no secret that the city was at the center of the pandemic this year, and it has a lot of issues ahead of it, from budgets to health. Visitors can decide for themselves if it has turned into a scene of chaos, the type of picture you might get from some Long Island Republican campaigns. But one thing's definitely true. The city's not moving anywhere, and neither is Long Island. and they deeply depend on each other. So don't expect an end to the political jockeying for these two regions joined at the hip.